Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all joining us on this lovely floor. So thanks. It's nice to see new faces and familiar ones. My name is Amélie Canel-Vallée. I'm the director of the Department of Equity. The chair, français anglais. The chair of the Department of Equity, Ethics, and Policy. And I'm very pleased today that we get to co-host this seminar with Eran.
And the philosophy department.
So Eran Talsen is chair on data ethics. And I'll just turn it over to you to introduce our speaker today.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'm Eran Tal, associate professor at the philosophy department, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Professor Sean Valles today. He's the director of the Center for Bioethics and Social Justice at Michigan State University, where he's also a full professor. Professor Valles is a philosopher of health. He studies how inequitable health disparities arise. And I first came to know his excellent book, Philosophy of Population Health, Philosophy for a New Public Health Era, when I was working with Sarah Claremont, who's here as well, one of our PhD students. And I was immediately struck by how relevant his work is to philosophy of science in general, and to ethics in general. His work explores the ways in which ethical and evidential issues quite generally combine to give rise to inequitable disparities, which is of course relevant outside of just medicine. He's also written a lot about the challenges of responsibly using race and ethnicity concepts in monitoring health disparities, and on the rhetoric surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. He's also the co-editor of the book series Bioethics for Social Justice that's published by Oxford University Press. And I could go on, but for best use of the time, let me just hand it over to Professor Valles. Thank you very much. We'll be talking about the many contradictions of the Make America Healthy Again movement.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate this opportunity to really present rough draft work. I have not presented this ever before. I've been originally thinking making it into an op-ed or something, maybe, and maybe it will be at some point. But like maybe there is something here. And I don't know if it's philosophy. I don't know if it's population health. I don't even know if it's ethics. But there is a series of things that had not been said as far as I could tell. And so I will give a take on the many contradictions of the Make America Healthy Again movement. So this is so I will be using the terms Make America Healthy Again. So that's MAHA, and then there's the Make America Great Again movement, which is sort of headed by President Trump. That's the MAGA movement. I will refer to these because they take so long to say. As MAGA and MAHA, I find them both frustrating to say. So there are some fundamental tensions between the MAHA movement and the MAGA movement. There are tensions even within the MAHA movement. I would think they would be irreconcilable ones. So looking at the history of this, and I'm going to have to sort of glaze over a lot of different things here, and so please save your questions. I'm happy to try to answer more or to say I don't know to some things. So for the 2024 election, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., who is the nephew of JFK, the storied American president, and the son of Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., who both of those figures were assassinated very tragically. He had been for a long time an influencer and a leader within the vaccine skeptic movement. There are many different terminologies to use here. The vaccine hesitancy movement. He's one of the more vociferous anti-vaccine folks out there, and he'd been doing that since the 2000s. But before that, and even after that, he had been an environmental lawyer. And so exploring and trying to advocate for environmental change to have a healthier country, which in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense. He ran against President Trump in the election. He lost pretty immediately, but in a surprise move, President Trump basically subsumed his movement into the MAHA movement that did not yet have that name again, that did not really have that name fully attached to it, but it subsumed that movement into the MAGA movement. And that doesn't make a lot of sense because you have environmental activism on one side, combined with anti-vaccine parents or vaccine skeptic parents, wellness influencers, holistic medicine advocates, lots and lots of different people who didn't seem like they had a whole lot in common with far-right American politics. And so how do they come together? And I don't think it actually makes sense in a logical sense, but it makes sense in a different kind of sense. It makes sense under an aesthetic and an ethos of fascism. And so I'm going to make that case today that these contradictions about what are the viewpoints within this movement, I think there is no there. There is no logic that where it all hangs together, but it does hang together in aesthetics, in a viewpoint, and in the embodiment of certain figures as representatives of people who are going to change the course of America, to return America to a healthy state, a thing that, as a preview, has never existed. And a thing that they present data showing has never existed. And so it's this bizarre movement of trying to pull together basically a huge broad tent of opponents of or skeptics about the efficacy of modern biomedicine in making America a healthy place. And America is, I'm not sure, maybe most of you know, compared to peer countries, it is at the bottom of almost every single list in terms of health outcomes. So we recently just got some new data that we have reached the life expectancy of 79, which is something I think you achieved in the year 2000 in Canada. And so like we're catching up to you, although I'm not sure if we're gonna actually ever get to 81. So I want to talk about how we got to this point, or at least my take on how we got to this point. Why is this one? Okay. Sticky button. Conflict of interest disclosure. I suppose, in a sense, I worked for one day for the Moderna Incorporated. They had a workshop talking about vaccines and vaccine communication. I went to that. I participated. That was it. But just be candid. Figure I'd taken enough of their vaccines. I should give them a shot and see what they have to say. Okay. So I think maybe the reason there hasn't been more written about this is both because it is very, very new. I'll be talking about things that are literally happening within this week. And so that's why there hasn't been a lot of literature about this in the philosophical world or in sort of like there's lots of criticism, but I feel like not sort of making some of the points I'm saying. And I think part of it is it's really hard to take this Make America Healthy Again movement seriously. It seems very bizarre and it's hard to wrap one's mind around what exactly it's doing. And part of that has to do with the leader being this figure, RFK Jr. And so it's hard to take him seriously professionally. And so he'd already made a lot of enemies by making a lot of overtly false statements about vaccines, claiming that the rubella vaccine contains ingredients it does not contain, saying that it's to blame for rising rates of autism, which has been disproven many times. Lots and lots of false rhetoric around vaccines. That was what he was most famous for. But he is a very strange person. During his confirmation as the Secretary for Health and Human Services, which makes him basically in charge of the entire health apparatus of the United States, he refused to give up his referral fees. He did refer cases in an ongoing HPV vaccine lawsuit. He said he would not give up his royalties or his referral fee. Eventually, he relented after a lot of pressure. He said, "Okay, I will give the money to one of my sons," which to me is not a super satisfactory solution to someone who makes a career out of claiming that everyone else has a conflict of interest and is corrupt. He sometimes has promoted HIV denialism, which I'm not sure if all of you even know that's a thing. So denying that HIV causes AIDS is a thing that was a thing. It's not a thing very often anymore for lots of reasons, like modern virology. But there was a time in the 80s when it sort of made sense to some people, and then it made sense to fewer people, but it still has stuck around. And he is these things. He speculated that COVID-19 was genetically engineered to spare Chinese and Ashkenazi Jewish people, which is troubling on so many grounds. I believe he said it was targeting white and black people, and I don't even know what was going on there. I will say that often. And personally, it's also hard to take seriously. And this is not to be ad hominem. It's just that, like, this is why it is. These are among the reasons why it is hard to take this seriously academically. He is accused of sexually assaulting a babysitter that he hired, which is absolutely awful, and I think needs to be mentioned more often because that is a very serious thing. He admitted to dumping a bear carcass in Central Park, New York City. There was a story behind it. It doesn't make that much more sense in this area. He's accused by his daughter of illegally decapitating a whale carcass and driving for 5 hours with the severed head on the roof of the family car because he liked to study bones and skulls. Which is also illegal because you're not supposed to decapitate endangered species. This is hard to take seriously, and I think that's really part of what's going on here. And so I'm going to make an attempt at taking this seriously, although literally, I think literally seriously gets really interesting. So I come at this, and I'm watching the evolution of this new movement of discontent against modern biomedicine. And I think that's interesting. I have also been studying and writing about a field that is interested in what are the failures of modern biomedicine, which is the field of population health. It does not exclude biomedicine. It made biomedicine part of a larger solution. And so we need to think differently about biomedicine. This was actually a movement that began in Canada at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And so what it is a research program that confronts the structural forces that place individuals at risk, creates distributions of health and disease unequally across socially defined groups, and focuses on embedding biological pathways within social interactions that develop across the life course and across generations. And so this was, and it began with this volume that was published by the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. Why are some people healthy and the others not? It is easier to understand it as why are some peoples healthy and others not? Why are there sick populations? There will always be sick individuals, but is there a reason there should be sick populations? And the proposed answer was, we don't need to have sick populations. We can do things. These are modifiable things, but a lot of the modifications that would be required to make non-sick populations are not going to be through the biomedical system. They're going to be through intervention into neighborhoods, into urban design, into regulations of environmental toxins, into trying to shift public behavior around things like removing shame and stigma around HIV status and things like that. And so it's saying that we need to have a big intervention, and biomedicine is not going to get you all the things that you want to get. And so I was interested in seeing this sort of new skeptic movement arising inside the United States after there already had been this one that I thought had actually made some really excellent points about how we should do things. So I'm an advocate for it, population health. And I think the sort of the operating ethos is that basically biology is not destiny here. That there is no biological reason why every population should not be as healthy as the best. There never needs to be such thing as a sick neighborhood. Again, there will always be people who are born with a genetic risk for something. There will be people with congenital malformations, and sometimes those maybe we'll even solve some of those. But we'll always have sick people. But again, we do not have to have sick neighborhoods. And I think some of that same concern, that same frustration of why is there so much sickness in America? Why are so many people sick all the time? We have some of the worst morbidity and mortality again among all of the peer countries. And that is not the severity of how bad this disparity is shocks almost every single audience I speak to in the United States. Like, we didn't realize it was that bad. But there is an undercurrent of concern, like that there is both a rejection against the idea that America is failing compared to other countries, but also an acknowledgement that things are not going great. It's very expensive. It is hard to get care. It is hard to get healthy. It is hard to stay healthy. It is hard to be a healthy person. So I wrote a book about this. And in the book, I emphasize that the way that population health does succeed, when it does succeed, and I think it is on the right path to success, is through humility. It needs humility that's fundamentally baked into every single aspect of it. It should have humility in its basic epistemology and the basic theories of knowledge that it uses. And it should have humility about the kinds of expertise that are involved. So it needs interdisciplinarity, which I love being deep because you're a very interdisciplinary place. Maybe this is not a hard sell, but like you can't just have one discipline that's controlling health. There is no privileged viewpoint on health. There is not one angle on it that is the right one. It's not epidemiology, it's not sociology, it's not clinical medicine. There is no privileged view, is my sort of interpretation of one of the takeaways of this field. And also we need what I call intersectoral humility, that there cannot be a single part of society that sort of is leading the charge on health. We need to have collaboration between education and the private sector and the public sector and nonprofit groups. We need all of them working together, and there should not be one that sort of lords over all the other ones. That has not been successful to this point, and it seems that the field has been illustrating why that is sort of an inherent part of it. We need to have this humility about who gets to be in charge of health. And so what came out of that is this idea of a culture of health. And the idea of a culture of health is that we need health that is culture deep and culture wide. That we need to have we need health in the way that we choose the hours that children go to school. And so there's been research, for instance, in the United States, that when children start primary school and especially secondary school very early in the morning, that is very hard to square with the biological rhythms of a teenager. And so adolescents have a very, very hard time going to bed early, waking up and waking up early. And that is not just because they are like those teenagers. That is part of the biological rhythms that emerge during puberty. And so there was a movement to try to move schools to start a little bit later so that there would be better educational outcomes and fewer cases of teenagers crashing their cars because they're tired in the morning. And so we need to think about all these different pieces in order to improve health, and it can't just be focused inside hospital walls. And it can't even just be focused in what's happening inside the White House or what's happening inside the legislature. It has to be everywhere. And so I make the case that epistemic humility is the bedrock, the thing here. And so it's this foundational attitude and that we need to have in order to create a culture of health. We need a lot of different types of knowledge as input. We need all sorts of we need indigenous epistemologies. We need sociology. We need community health activists. We need all these people as part of the inputs of this process. And this is one thing that the Make America Healthy movement has done quite effectively in a certain sense, is by inviting into the big tent a lot of people that have been excluded in other contexts. And so dietitians, for instance, at least some types of dietitians have been really excluded from a lot of the discourse around how to improve population health. The Make America Healthy Again movement invited them in, including people who were absolute cranks. And so they had a YouTube channel, and so now I'm a dietitian. Like that is not in fact make you a dietitian. And so it's inside the population health movement, or the population health framework is what I usually call it. It's based on some ideas that actually had been partially developed again in Canada. It was partially based on the Lalonde report, if any of you are familiar. It was one of the first major reports. It's arguably the first major report, at least in a democracy. It was making the case for why we need to have different parts of society all working in sync in order to improve health. That it can't just be a medical-centered and sort of radiating outward methodology. That eventually led into the Ottawa Charter. Hey, there you go. Canada just keeps popping up. And so what it says, and this is something I make central in my book, is that health is created and lived by people within the settings of their everyday life, where they learn, work, play, and love. Health is created by caring for oneself and others, by being able to take decisions and have control over one's life circumstances, and by ensuring that the society one lives in creates conditions that allow the attainment of health by others. And that was a radical idea at the time. That was from 1986. So we need a wide range of interventions in society as an output after we have all these many different types of knowledge all contributing to this process. And so in order to do that, we need a lot of humility. It's hard to accept that many inputs, and it's hard to condone that many outputs. A lot of people get very uncomfortable in this. We saw this certainly during COVID, that public health was just everywhere. It was too intrusive, that everything was being made into a health issue. And so, for instance, I've done a lot of work on homelessness. Homelessness became a public health issue in the United States in a way that it had not been ever before recognized that way publicly. And that made a lot of people uncomfortable. There were theoretical opposition to that. There was legal opposition to that. The legal opposition won the day, but it raised into public consciousness, what if housing policy is a health issue? What I say in my book is that doesn't mean it's only a health issue. It does not mean that we're going to doom ourselves to saying that health is the only thing that matters ever in any society. That is not what I'm saying. But what it did is start putting into the public consciousness this idea of what if all policies are health policies? I'll talk more about that later. And so, in my view, on epistemic humility, I use a model of this that's taken from Anita Ho, who is also in Canada, now that it occurs to me. And the way she puts it, I think this is wonderful. It's a disposition as well as a commitment. It arises out of professionals' acknowledgement of the boundary of their expert domain, as well as their fallibility. She developed this for doctor-patient relationships especially, but I think it works generally. Lead to commitments to make realistic assessment of what one knows and does not know, and to restrict one's confidence and claims to knowledge only to what one actually knows about his or her specialized domain. In particular, it's a recognition that knowledge creation is an interdependent and collaborative activity. We make knowledge together. That's in the way, isn't there? No, just a little. There we go. Both the healthcare provider again and the patient are counting on each other in investigating a full picture of the patient's experience and determining the most appropriate management strategies. So neither the patient nor the doctor has a privileged view on the patient's health. They both need each other and they can make knowledge together, but they can only make it together. And it starts with them recognizing, well, I know more about the way the pathology works, but I don't know the way you live your life. And so when I suggest an intervention, maybe that is completely implausible for you for reasons that I have no conception of. And so we need to work together on this. And by contrast, epistemic hubris, I see as the foundation for the Make America Healthy movement, or at least it is one of the foundational blocks. I think hubris is baked into this whole concept. I think even the phrase, I'm sure you've heard it before, do your own research. It's laughed at a lot now. And it's funny because I'm a researcher, I do my own research. But the way this term is used is an expert said something, you should go on the internet and make your own decisions based on what you saw on YouTube, which is not the same thing as research. And so it's a corruption of the idea of research and saying that all thinking or investigating is research that is on par in the same ways about the same topics as what other experts have done. And so there's I don't really know much about pathology. I don't know much about virology or immunology. And so maybe if I'm worried about the ingredients of a vaccine, maybe that's something I should ask someone else about. And so we have RFK Jr. saying, this idea that you should trust the experts, a good mother doesn't do this. So the discourse around especially childhood vaccines. And so not only is it is fundamentally irresponsible as a parent to trust experts. You must be the expert. And whatever you learn, that will override any epistemic claims, any knowledge claims that are made by any other person that your expertise trumps all of them. I hate that word now, but it's just it's getting very, yeah, the whole idea of a trump card is getting real weird. So I'll try to avoid that one now. And so I find this to be a frustrating corruption of it because I do think that patients and parents, they are necessary parts of this epistemic process. We need their knowledge too. Like I was just saying, even in healthcare settings, we need that parent to be part of that process of knowledge creation. But instead of making them part of the process, it elevates the parent into being the one who not only gets to make the decisions, because they get to make the decisions, that's what they do, but also that they are the chief knower. And so humility is not just saying that we're going to raise up arbitrarily the knowledge claims made by one person or one group of people. It means first we need to think, okay, what kinds of things do you know? What kinds of things do you know? What kinds of things do I know? Let's see where we can go with these together, recognizing that each other person, that we know things, and that we have reasons for believing things. And so there's this, and so I think this is tapping into something, this idea that patients don't want to just be lectured at or to be told by an authoritarian doctor, you must do these things, otherwise you're a bad person. And so there is something that is being tapped into here. And so I think it's also, you also see the hubris in things like the way that there is discourse around especially autism. I say this partially as an autistic person, that it really bothers the hell out of me that when there's this discourse around autism, that we need to have policies that are going to avoid creating more autistic people, which is a very contentious claim within the community. Like, do we want to have no autism left in the world? Like, I don't feel that way because I can't imagine not being that way, and so it gets into really difficult territory. But the thing that's hubristic about it is the claims that there is nothing that the autistic people have to contribute to the knowledge process. And so if you're having this discourse around, we need to be careful around vaccines because otherwise it might make an autistic person like, should we ask autistic people what their input is on this topic? Oh, we don't need to listen to autistic people. And so RFK says they'll never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, like professor of philosophy, they'll never play baseball. I actually hate baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And so this is the representation of autism. And so this is just one example. There are so many other examples of the hubris. But I think this is especially an epistemic hubris that we have this concern for this population. We have no interest in what they have to say about it. And some of us actually can say things about it. Like I can. I'm saying things right now. And so when I'm talking about the idea that we need to have that someone needs to first recognize the scope of their expertise. What do I know? What do other people know? What are the limits of my knowledge? Instead of having the usual processes by which the Centers for Disease Control would update its websites with new scientific information, that would normally be a scientific process made by scientists. And instead, this part of the CDC and website on autism and vaccines was changed at the express direction of RFK. He doesn't have any medical or scientific credentials. He was trained as a lawyer. And so it says the claim that vaccines do not cause autism is not an evidence-based claim. Well, I'm not sure if that's something he could evaluate because he doesn't really know much about scientific evidence, to be perfectly frank. And that is not just a disparagement against him. That's just not his expertise. And so the hubris of personally changing by the head of Health and Human Services, they don't change. Their job is not to update websites. Their job is not to decide what the science says. It is a managerial position, but it is directly intervening in the science instead. And so that to me seems like hubris. Okay, so now we're getting into the fascism. Warning. There's a historian, or like sort of intellectual historian, Finkelstein, who does great work on this, and I'm going to use some of his work here. And so he says that fascism proposed the notion of truth that transcended reason and was incarnated in the myth of the leader. The myth was literally embodied in the person of the leader. They are not a representative of it. They are it. They are an embodiment of the thing. For fascist incarnation was the opposite of representation. In fascist ideology, language could not represent the reality of inner feelings insofar as generic conceptions implied a rational process of translation. Only images or actions, not reflective thoughts or the words they expressed, could instantiate and put those feelings into practice. For fascists, this was the essence of fascism's authenticity in politics. They stood against all reason and believed themselves to be firmly in the realm, this thing. It goes up here. Rooted in the mythical. And so this is where I'm starting to, this is what the kind of thing that's maybe started thinking, like maybe this makes a kind of sense, this movement, but it's not reason, it's something else. It is myth-making. And so among the many sort of critiques in journalism, pieces of journalism around this there was some interesting work by Kaiser Family Foundation, I believe. They have a great news service. And they did this interesting study of how has the social media presence of the Health and Human Services agency changed over time. And so before and after the new administration. And one of the most striking things is, whereas in 2024, Health and Human Services Agency would mostly post public health resources such as the 988 suicide hotline on its Instagram feed. Its feed to 2025 features more of the health secretary himself. through the end of August, according to a KFF Health News review, 77 of its 101 posts featured Kennedy off fishing, biking, or doing pull-ups. I've decided not to give you any pictures of him doing pull-ups. He exercises in jeans, like that's the whole thing. But it's you know, it's in some ways reminiscent of other sort of displays of manliness and masculinity and power. And is more than just a representation. He is more than just a representation of health. He is put forward as an embodiment of health. By contrast, only 146 of the agency's 754 posts last year, about 20% featured Javier Becerra, his predecessor. In 2024, on Instagram, the agency promoted Medicare and individual insurance open enrollment. These were very crucial times. You have to re-sign up for insurance. And in 2025, the agency has not even done those things. And so instead you have, this is an AI-generated screenshot from a video of him going through sort of ecstasy on a dance floor because he drank whole milk. Again, like I'm saying aesthetics, like this is aesthetic, more than rational. And so like, imagine what this means if you're outside the realm of rationality and we're just in aesthetics here. This is all vibes. This is him celebrating his birthday, because famously he does not eat anything other than milk, meat, and some fermented vegetables. And so he is having a birthday steak. And so now when there's talk about inverting the food pyramid and having like meat at the top, that is him. That is his thing. And so that is his birthday cake. This stuff is really, really quite strange. And so I think that this is meaningful. This is not just silliness. I think there is something here. And I think this is making demonstrations of his personal health a way of showing his credentials. His authenticity is this, not the things he says. And so he can do pull-ups despite being a 72-year-old who formerly had problems with heroin. He is able to, he seems healthy despite having this diet that is seen as atypical. And so the fact that his very existence is proof that not only is his approach to things correct, but that he is embodying that truth. It's also worth noting here that Trump himself has made claims about his physical health, bizarrely like central to his claims of authority. And so he makes claims that I'm the healthiest president that ever existed. And he will get people around him to say that he is even superhuman in those words. In his level of health, despite that he does not seem to be healthy in some ways from external appearances. We don't know because we have not seen the direct evidence from his clinical evaluations. But the idea that he needs to project this, that it is going to be proof. And so despite the fact that President Trump does not believe in exercise, he thinks that we function like batteries of energy. And so if you exercise, then you lose some of that and you never get it back, which is just a fringe view to say the least. But the fact that he is manifesting this proves that he's right about everything, that he is the true one. And so I think there's actually, I think the real tension here that seems most looming here is, I think we have two mythical figures. I think this is a mythical figure, and I think the president is a mythical figure. I don't know how much longer they can tolerate each other sharing the spotlight like this. I'm not sure if that's really possible within a fascist sort of ideology. I think it's not their policy-making disagreements. They seem to be okay with that in the sense that RFK Jr. very famously opposes all kinds of processed foods. He says the selling of processed foods, including to children, is spiritual warfare. And the fight against processed foods is spiritual warfare. There's also a famous picture of him having McDonald's on Air Force One with the president. These are not in conflict because the conflict does not need to be rational. The legitimacy is not rational. Legitimacy is embodied. They are together. They are manifesting their strength. They were saying with Elon Musk, it's a whole thing. But their very presence together, that aesthetic, is part of the proof is basically the proof of their legitimacy. And no, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. But again, we're outside of sense here. So thinking about this idea I mentioned earlier about interdisciplinary humility, that's one of the things I most loved about population health when I sort of got into it is that there's not a single privileged view. We need all these different disciplines working together. I like that idea. It has to inherently be interdisciplinary. So we need microbiologists, we need nurses, community food activists. We need all these people's knowledge. Like, I love this. That includes things like respect for qualitative data, respect for quantitative data, respect for ethnographies, and there are tensions within the movement. I know there are people saying this. You know, social scientists within the movement saying, or within the framework saying, we are not taking it as seriously as we should be. I think that's sort of a natural part of this, the sort of the tensions within interdisciplinarity, like sort of the ebb and flow of whose knowledge boundaries overlap with whose and that kind of thing. And by contrast, I see some of the hubris in things like the claims made by Jay Bhattacharya, who's the director of the National Institutes of Health. And so he says that he was giving an interview about what is his ideology, what is his viewpoint on health. He says, well, we want to focus on real scientific ideas that actually improve health. Like, okay, so like no fake ideas. All right, go on. So I want to distinguish that from ideological contracts, so like DEI. So EDI, I think is the way you say it. Yeah. And in so many ways are not even in principle falsifiable. If you believe structural racism is the primary reason why minorities are in lower health, how would you disprove that? What experiment could you do to disprove that? If you can't think of an experiment to disprove something, it is not a scientific idea. So some Karl Popper kind of philosophy light here. But then contrast that to the way he talks about other kinds of evidence. So when he was asked if vaccines could be the cause of autism after many experimental studies on their safety, he said, some vaccines have been studied extensively for a link to autism, like the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella. And scientists have failed to find it really well in well-done studies. It seems unlikely for MMR. Others have not been as well studied. As a scientist, I'd say it's unlikely that one of the vaccines is the cause, but I don't know it for certain. And so suddenly this certainty pulls back. And so he's absolutely certain that there's no scientifically sound way to study structural racism, even though there is a massive literature on how you can methodologically soundly study structural racism. Nancy Krieger has a great article on it from 2003. That's a long time ago. And there's been a massive literature after that. And so he probably doesn't know about that, but that's also the point. He doesn't know about that. And so he's dismissing it despite the fact that he does not know. He is rejecting the legitimacy of a huge branch of epidemiology and public health research, among some social science of race, et cetera. And so I'm not sure why we're kind of cutting some of this off, and there's a problem with the translation, but basically, I think there's not a really coherent or consistent epistemology here. His skepticism in one area and his openness to new ideas in another area is in tension. I think there is not really, I think it is inconsistent. And you got even more inconsistent when he and the other members of the Trump health team, Jay Bhattacharya is on the far left, had put forward this idea of gold standard science. And so gold standard science is reproducible, transparent, communicative of error and certainty, collaborative and interdisciplinary, skeptical of its findings and assumptions, structured for falsifiability of hypotheses. So you see falsifiability coming in again. I love that also interdisciplinary is in there. Subject to unbiased peer review, accepting of negative results as positive outcomes, without conflicts of interest. A lot of this sounds good. And like you could quibble over some of it, like this is not like crazy stuff in the gold standard science. But then there are all the advocates of that. That's Dr. Oz, just to the right of, he's now in charge of our $1.7 trillion Medicare and Medicaid agency. At the press conference where they announced that Tylenol, paracetamol, did you say Tylenol or paracetamol here? Tylenol, okay, second, sorry. What's that? Acetaminophen. Yeah, or yeah. Is definitively a cause of autism. And that claim is, of course, made by President Trump, not by any of the health leaders. And so the skepticism, you need to be skeptical, you need to communicate error and uncertainty. And we know for absolute certainty that Tylenol causes autism, or a fetal exposure to Tylenol. And so this seems patently inconsistent. And I'm only pointing this out because I think the inconsistency is not an inconsistency within a framework, within a worldview, where logical, rational arguments are not the thing anymore. We are outside of that realm. And so I make the claim in my book that we need collaborative action across the whole of society. The only way we can ever have success in trying to actually successfully improve health is by having this attitude of having humility about all the different parts of society working together to do this. It shows up inside the Adelaide recommendations on health on healthy public policy. These are some interesting sort of like milestones in health research history in my mind, my sort of interpretation of where population health came from. It led directly into this idea of health in all policies. That started in the EU branch of the UN, I believe, or the WHO, and it got adopted fairly widely. This is from the American Society for Public Health in the United States. And health in all policies I see as both a descriptive claim and a normative claim. And so it's not just what it is, but it's also what it should be. And so it's saying that whether you like it or not, tax policy is health policy. It affects the flow of money. Money affects health. I can show you some data on that if you don't already know that like your health is affected by the amount of money you have. And so tax policy, sorry, it's health policy. So is road design policy. So we're kind of all policies, unfortunately. Like that's just like whether you like it or not, they are affecting our ecosystem one way or another. And so all policies are health policies, at least in some parts. But also saying you need to treat all policies as if they're health policies. So you can't be making policy decisions completely blind to their impact on health, or at least that's unwise, because then you're going to change your tax policy and realize like, oops, we actually just really made huge reductions in the health of seniors. That would be very bad. And so we need to be more reflective and thoughtful about the way that our policies impact health. And I see an inversion of that in the Make America Healthy Again movement. I see intersectoral hubris. And so we have the president using presidential threats to demand drug prices that are lower. This quote always amuses me. Not 50%, 14 to 1,500% lower. Oh yeah, got to see your mostly comment on that one. Yes, he has a degree in economics from Ivy League University. The amount of graft and regulatory capture. Are you all familiar with the term regulatory capture? So you can have members of private industry, like maybe like a lobbyist, retires from lobbying and they become the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, for instance. And so that's basically the people who are being regulated capturing the agencies that are meant to regulate them. And so they're basically infiltrating and controlling their own industries. And so you have huge amounts of them, lots of lobbyists making their way, lots of people from private industry, some of them still part of private industry making their way into the administration. And so that undercuts regulations in a huge range of areas. Huge cuts to federal funding and University of Medical Research funding. That's been devastating across medicine. I imagine most of you have heard about this. The funding cuts, like massive, arbitrary, targeted towards anything that's related to justice or diversity, including I know people who had their grants cut because they were studying diversity of plant species. But like the AI bot caught that's like, oh, diversity, like no, it's like corn, chill out. Attacking the nonprofit sector, using investigations and terrorism accusations. So any nonprofit that's seen as an opponent is being attacked, and so that important nonprofit sector that is hugely influential in the United States, and I imagine also here as well, like they are being directly attacked. So instead of having them part of the solution, they are now enemies. Illegal regulatory workarounds. So this relationship between government and industry, there needs to be some kind of relationship between them. And so having arbitrary demands to lower prices, that is not a proper relationship between government and industry. Nor is basically creating a new fast track approval process for drugs that is patently illegal. One of the members of the Health and Human Services left over that dispute, supposedly. And then really tragically removing the US from the WHO entirely and cutting off global medical aid. And there will be an estimated additional 14 billion additional global deaths that are forecast as a result from the elimination of US aid, which I don't even know what to say about something like that. It's just like an entire world international aid, which is not without its problems. I imagine many of you here realize the problems within that world, but just to shut off the tap entirely is devastating. And it's not just devastating, it is hubristic. It is saying that we don't need the WHO, we don't need to be part of this global community. We can do American health, which is contrary to the very idea that was created in the founding of the WHO, which is that our health is shared, that borders do not control things. You think that after COVID, we would realize that that health does not respect borders. Not the way it works. And then it just goes on and on. The person who is chief of drug regulations is from the revolving door with industry that he said he would close, saying that government researchers need to stop publishing in top journals because they are corrupt. But then his agency wrote a report that cites all of them. And so you can't publish in the Lancet or BMJ or New England Journal of Medicine, but we'll cite them. But they're corrupt and illegitimate. It just goes on and on. And also he has been, I think, credibly accused of voter fraud himself, which if you're familiar with any of the rhetoric around the Make America Great movement, that's, yeah. And so one of the things that comes up inside the fascist sort of playbook, I suppose you could say it, is that I'm not sure where this fits in within the ideology, but it is a central element of the fascist lie, is projection. And so fascists will always, and apparently this is just a thing that happens, deny who they are and attribute their own characteristics, their responsibility, and their own totalitarian politics to their enemies. You accuse other people of destroying health while you are destroying health in numerous ways from time. I'm just about to end. And so it's, and including others in neglecting environmental health and destroying environmental regulations. Recently, the United States Environmental Protection Agency said that we are going to count the statistical value of life in the United States at 0. And so we no longer calculate the human cost of environmental regulations. And so, if you reduce exhaust from cars, how does that manifest in dollar savings in terms of human life saved? We don't use that anymore. We also no longer recognize climate change as a risk to health. So I'll wrap up here, using the Vaccine Advisory Committee of Conflicts of Interest, and then appointing people who have conflicts of interest. So my last point, and I'll wrap up just about here, is that the Make America Healthy Again movement is not just rife with contradictions, its very name is a lie. It is impossible because America has never been healthy. This is from the main page of the Make America Healthy Again website. This is their graph. This is actually widely used. Many of you have probably seen this. This is charting how much is spent on health expenditure per capita versus life expectancy. And each dot is sort of over time. And so you see the United States has increased its life expectancy very modestly, but the costs have far outpaced any other peer country. Where in the red line are we doing great? This is the graph they used. It doesn't make any sense. You can't say Make America Healthy Again and show a graph that America has never been healthy. And so this is where we're at. I think I'll just, so I'll end with this year. The Make America Great Again movement and the Make America Healthy Again movements, they are united in the mythical golden age, which is a fundamental part of fascism. The return to a golden age. So this is from Jason Stanley's book. There are other people who said very similar things. So fascist politics invokes a pure mythic past tragically destroyed. A time when we ate meat and unpasteurized milk and only fermented vegetables, and we didn't have processed foods. The mythic time was a time of glory of the nation, wars of conquest led by patriotic generals, armies filled with countrymen, able-bodied, which we've lost. We've lost our able-bodied country. Loyal warriors whose wives were at home raising the next generation. In the present, these myths became the basis of the nation's identity under fascist politics. And the rhetoric of extreme nationalists such as glorious past has been lost by the humiliation brought by globalism, liberal cosmopolitanism, and respect for universal values such as equality. These values are supposed to have made the nation weak in the face of real and threatening challenges to the nation's existence. These myths are generally based on fantasies of a non-existent past. And a past uniformity which survives in the traditions of the small towns and countrysides. Famously, the Make America Great Again movement pulls very heavily from the rural parts of the United States and really sort of presents itself to them as sort of being the authentic part of the United States, whereas the cities are corrupt with liberalism and things like that. Which survives in the traditions of small towns and countrysides that remain relatively unpolluted by the liberal decadence of the cities. So I'm going to wrap up here. I think the inconsistencies are not an internal problem if you're not using a rational-based system. We are instead using a fascist. So this makes sense, but it only makes fascist sense. And so I want to take this seriously, and thank you for your time. I went a little bit like 2 minutes over long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valles. We have about 8 minutes for questions. Yes.
Yeah,
talk. It's really fascinating. And yeah, I can only imagine how frustrating it is to work on situations. I guess I wanted to ask, do you have a kind of like a hopeful insight related to how people change their mind? Well, yeah, it's stuck in a way in the same positions, but like without resorting to fascist myth-making, like how?
Yeah. I think partially if there is a problem, we need to recognize what it is before we can solve it. And so I thought about having like a solution section. I'm not really there yet because this is sort of the draft version of something. Like I want to put some things out there and see how they sounded to y'all. But I think we have history as a guide here. And so, for instance, Germany has not entirely removed fascism from its country, but they got past it collectively as a country. Germany is not a fascist country now. So they made the transition, as did Italy, as did other countries that had their sort of their moments of fascism. And so we need to both recognize that there is something that is being tapped into in this process, but also that there is a way out. And so like denazification, for instance, was a very long and painful process in Germany. And there are other experts about that. That's not my area of expertise. But it is not that there is no way forward from that. That was not the end of Germany. That was not the end of Italy. That was not the end of every country that has ever had a fascist leader. And so I think there's hope in the sense that these, the 1,000-year Reich was not a 1,000-year Reich. It was a few years in the grand scheme of things. And so I don't know what our path is as a country in the United States away from this sort of this ideal, from this type of reasoning, this type of presentation of authority and rationality that's based outside of reason and based in sort of another theoretical system. But such a shift has happened before.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So there's something also inherent in one of the things you mentioned, this sort of idea about the causality factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's true, right? These things are complicated and it is difficult to show causality. That's like the theme of population.
Oh, yeah, like
so,
like with structural racism, for instance, yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, sort of denying that this is possible. How does that feed into this idea of easy answers? One of the things that strikes me about the autism debate, I'm one of those kids who will never play basketball, and
which is the thing that it exists, yeah.
But it's like, it's the vaccine. Yeah. And advocates, when you move into advocacy, it's easy answers for all the complications of causality in science. So it's very cool.
I agree, yes.
I think the tragedy is like since Plato, being humble and political power.
I'm sorry, can you say that a little bit louder? There's a bench right here.
Yeah, I think the tragedy is that since Plato, as philosophers, we know that being humble and political power is not compatible. So when political power is corrupted, being humble doesn't work, and humility.
Yeah, is it Thrasymachus in the Republic who says that that basically authority is just strength. Like that was like, the first few pages, and like we move on from that real fast because like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But like, what if we ran with that? What if strength and projection of strength and threats to take over Canada, and all these other things, what if we just ran with that? And I think it's very tragic that like somehow we've like lost these insights, that tradition has been, all those insights gone. That too is hubris.
Yeah, if I could, many of the strands of MAHA obviously go back generations, right? So
As strands, yeah.
So 1885, people were rioting in Montreal and trashing the town hall because they were being forced to vaccinate against smallpox. And generations of people were skeptical of fluoridation of water, for example.
That's one of the.
Are they all proto-fascists in your
No.
analysis, or?
Yeah, and I'm trying to avoid the claim because I don't think it's true that basically members of the community are fascists. I think it's that the way that the ideas and this sort of big tent, this very tenuous big tent hangs together is through that rationale. It's by tapping into that type of justification for why the big tent should exist in the first place. And so the COVID vaccine skeptics like Jay Bhattacharya, they don't really have anything that they should have in common with someone like RFK Jr. They don't have compatible viewpoints about anything, about science, about like Jay Bhattacharya is not opposed to all vaccines, I don't think, but somehow they found common cause, and they found common cause also with like the food babe. Like why are these all together? Like why are all these different strands accepting that they are part of the same rope? And I think that rationale or the appeal that is being pulled on is there, even though they each have their own viewpoints, their own worldviews that don't actually line up with each other. And so I think it's a way of sort of pulling together despite fundamental disagreements by trying to draw attention to the figure of someone like RFK Jr. Say like, no, keep your focus on him. He is your guiding star. Don't worry about the fact that these are not your concerns. That you don't want to have deregulation of environment. That you don't want to have reduced monitoring of food safety and things like this. Like these are things that you don't want. And so it's a way of sort of pulling attention away and sort of pulling in these different groups into this movement. And obviously a lot of people have said like, no, I'm not part of that. Like, like someone could say, I'm a patient, I'm a vaccine skeptic. I don't buy into this guy's stuff though. And so it's not like everyone is sort of automatically pulled in automatically, but it's a way of creating a big tent in a way that shouldn't work. Like this big tent shouldn't be able to hold together. I think it's holding together in a way that is different than a way it would otherwise. I'm not making claims about the individual belief systems, I guess, of people. It's a way of drawing the attention. I mean, the origin of the word fascism shares the claims like it's a fascinating talk. Fascination. It is attention. It is aesthetics. It is overriding other parts that are sort of like redirecting people's attention is one way of thinking about it.
Fortunately, at time, I want to, before concluding, thank everyone who's joined us, both in person and online. I want to thank Dean for hosting this talk, and Anaik for organizing and supporting us. And finally, of course, to Professor Valles for sharing his work with us. Let's give him a round of applause. Who are here in person who wish to chat with Professor Valles, we'll be moving on to the area just outside this room to make room for other people who are coming in, but you're welcome to chat there.
I've never had